Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to develop web applications with Python using the Flask web framework. So Flask is basically a set of tools also written in Python that allows us to create applications using Python. And by applications, we basically mean websites where you can input and store information and receive some output based on that information. So common web applications are Facebook, Twitter, even Google's a web application. Something that wouldn't be a web application would be a blog where we're just displaying data and we're not really processing any data at all. So what we're going to be building is we're going to be building a vaccine passport system. So this is going to be a web application that's built for doctors to submit patient information and the number of vaccine doses they received and what types of vaccine doses they received. Then the doctor will be able to send the patient an email with a QR code. And using that QR code, they can access the web application again and show anyone that they have been vaccinated. So in this picture right here, we see a QR code displayed on a smartphone. Rather than showing the QR code on the app, we're just going to send the user or the patient a PDF through our web application. So basically, we're going to allow a doctor to register or log in, enter in some patient information, enter in their vaccination information, and then send a link to that via QR code to a patient. So the reason that we're doing this is in order to demonstrate how to build a simple web application using Python and Flask. And this is not going to be a very complex web application. Actually, this sort of system is quite simple. So it's quite a good way to demonstrate how to use Python and Flask. It's also very, very relevant to current events and worth a discussion about cybersecurity. Nowadays, a lot of people are debating whether or not vaccine passport systems are a good idea. And I think that whether you want to be opposed to them or you want to be in support of them, it makes a lot of sense to understand technically how they work. So that's kind of the point of doing this. Now, to get started, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need to make sure the Python programming language is installed. If you've done any of my previous tutorials, you most likely already have it installed, or if you have a Mac. If you have a Windows, you'll probably have to install it yourself, and it's pretty straightforward. There's actually a package you can download online that will just install it for you. I would also recommend getting Visual Studio, which is this right here. It's an IDE or integrated development environment where I write all of my Python code. So you can use other IDEs, but given that I'll be writing all my code in Visual Studio and using it quite extensively, it might be helpful to download it. The last tool that you want is DB Browser for SQLite. So similar to some of my previous tutorials as well, we're going to be using SQLite to store patient data in this web application. And DB Browser allows us to visualize a SQLite database. So just to kind of open it up and give you an idea of what that means. In previous tutorials, we just displayed the content of SQLite databases in the command line. Here we could actually open a DB file and we can see the different tables, what's in the tables, and how they're related to each other. So especially given that our databases are going to be organized in a more complicated way in this application, this could be really useful to see exactly what's going on. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with actually building the application. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a folder for our application, and then something called a virtual environment in that. And let's go ahead and do that, and then I'll kind of explain what this all means. So just to clear out my terminal right here. So this is a terminal or a command line in Windows, and we're going to create our application folder, and then make some additional preparations in order to get our application going in the terminal. The first thing I want to do is I want to kind of navigate around. I'm going to use ls, or this would be dir in Windows, to see what's in my current folder. And I want to navigate to my development folder. So I'm going to do cd development, which is the equivalent of clicking on a folder. Again, use ls to see what's in there. And I want to create a folder called Flask Vaccine Passport. I already have one right here, which is for the tutorial. That's where I kind of experimented with the code that we'll be writing this tutorial. But I'm going to create a new folder called Flask Vaccine Passport. And I'm creating a new folder using the command mkdir right here. So let's go ahead and do that. And we've got that right here. So now we're going to enter this folder, Flask Vaccine Passport. Should be ls, not xs. Going to go ahead and do that. Sorry, should be ls even. It should be cd. Cool. Okay, now we're in Flask Vaccine Passport. And what we want to do now is create a virtual environment. As we can see, currently this folder is empty, but we want to create a virtual environment for this folder. And what that means is we're going to turn this folder into a little box in the computer that is, in a way, separate from the computer. So we're going to turn this folder into a box, and inside this box, we're going to install all the libraries and all the files we need for our application, separate from the files in the computer outside this folder. The reason we're going to do this is because, for example, we might try to install a library or some code that corresponds to Python version 3.5 in our application. But there might be Python version 3 on the computer outside this application. So in order for there to not be a conflict between the files inside our application and outside our application, we're creating this separate environment for our web application. And this is also useful when we want to run this application on a different computer or a server, where there might even be other types of files or different versions of files that we are using in our application on the local computer. So in a nutshell, a virtual environment creates kind of a closed area for us to install all the files that we need and then successfully execute them. And this is kind of something that's going to be used for almost any Python applications that you build. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run this command, python 3 mvenv. So let's go ahead and do that. Take a second. And okay, we're good to go. So you can see here that we have this venv folder right here. If you're running Windows, it's going to be slightly different. You're just going to have py instead of Python 3. Now that we've created this virtual environment, we've created this little box for our web application to live in, we're going to activate it. So we're going to run this command, which will be, again, a little different, or quite different in Windows. So for as on a Mac, we're going to do .venv. We're going to use this, I believe it's called a backslash, bin/activate. And we can tell that this worked because right here we see venv in parentheses. So we've created this virtual environment. What we want to do now is we want to install the primary library, the primary set of code that we will be using in this tutorial. In this whole set of tutorials, which is Flask. So we're going to go ahead and run the command pip install Flask. Cool. Okay, looks like we installed Flask. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and we can start building our web application. And now at this point, I'm going to move away from the terminal right here just for a second. I'm going to open up Visual Studio. So now we should be able to navigate to our project, our application folder. We'll go to development, and then we're going to go to Flask Vaccine Passport right here. And right now, all we've got right here is venv. Okay, so now that we've got this right here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a few folders. The first one's going to be the app folder, which is where, in this particular application, all of our application folders are going, or sorry, all of our application code, or the main application code, is going to be stored. We're going to create a file outside of that called config.py, where we will store the settings for our application. And then we're going to create another file called run.py, which will allow us to start our application. So basically to click the on button for our application. So this is kind of the basic skeleton for our Flask application. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a file called init.py inside our app folder right here, okay? And what this is going to allow us to do is to access different objects and different data structures inside the app folder. That's kind of what an underscore init.py folder does by default. It makes the folder in which it is located importable. And also beyond that, we're going to initialize our application and create the main object that we're going to use to run all aspects of our application. So let's get started with from Flask, import Flask. So we're importing the contents of the library we just installed. Then we're going to create the app object, and this will be central to everything we do in this application. So app equals Flask, name, and then instance, relative config equals true. You don't really need to know what any of this means. These are just some values we've had to input to create our initial app object right here. So it's a Flask object, but we're storing it in a variable by the name of app, hence I'm calling it our app object. From app, import views. I'll demonstrate why we're going to use this in a second here. Sorry, from app, import views. And app.config .from object config. And this just means that we're going to get settings from this config.py file right here. I'm just going to go ahead and write the code for that right now. We're only going to have one config setting at the moment, and that's going to be debug equals true. And this is just going to be something that allows us to help find errors while we're developing this application. Okay, so we've done that, and we have this, curiously, we have from app import views. So what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to import a views file from inside the app folder, which we're going to go ahead and create right now. We'll create a new file, views.py. So this file right here is going to be central to our web application. And it's kind of going to be crucial in demonstrating like what a web application can do. In this views.py file, we're going to create our routes. That means we're going to create the URL or the addresses where different information, different HTML files, and different user responses. Well, no, not user responses, but basically, in a nutshell, this is going to be the file where we can access different URLs on our web application. And I'm just going to go ahead and go through this to demonstrate what that means. So we're going to have from app, import app. And what that's doing is importing our app object right here in underscore init.py. Then we're going to have from Flask. Well, we don't really need that for now. Let's start with the basics. What we're going to do is we're going to create our first route, which is @app And then we're going to create a function underneath this called index to symbolize this is kind of going to be our home page. Then we're going to return a message called homepage when someone accesses this particular URL. Next, we're going to create app.route patients. Def, I'm going to create a function called list of patients because this is where we're going to see a list of all the patients the doctor has access to and can make edits to. And by edits, I mean this list will allow the doctor to click to access the information of patients and edit it if they decide to do so. List of patients. And we're going to do app.route, and then we'll do just patient. And this will be the page or the URL where we're going to access individual patient data. Now, it still may not be clear what's going to happen here, but that's okay. Go ahead and work with me here and type in this code, and then we'll see exactly why we're doing it. All right. So for now, this should be good. We're going to go to run.py now, and we're going to go ahead and write our code to allow us to kick off this application, to turn on this application. And again, with this one as well, you don't really need to know how every line works, but I'll go ahead and explain anyways. So first of all, we're going to do from app, import app, which is again in our init.py file, getting this app, our Flask object that we've created. Then we're going to do if name equals main. App.run. So all this means is that if we type in the command Python or Python3 run.py, then this should execute app.run, starting our web application. So we've done that, we've done this. True is not defined. Okay, well, we need to make that a Boolean in Python. We can go ahead and do that. Okay, this looks good for now. Now we've created run.py right here. We've created a set of routes right here. And we've created init.py which has allowed us to initialize our application by creating app or a Flask object that will kind of underlie how everything in our application works. Like we created app here. As a result, we're using app.route and we're using app.run right here to start our application. So now that we've done this, we have like an application that should be functional at a basic level. Let's go back to our command line and let's get it working. So what we're going to do in our command line is we're going to look right here and we're going to do Python3 run.py. We may get an error. We'll see what happens. If there's an error, we'll go ahead and fix it, obviously. So you can kind of see what went wrong and what errors you might run into. So it looks like it works. So let's look at this output right here real quick, okay? So first of all, this says this is a development server. And that means that we've just started a server. We've turned our computer temporarily into a server through which we can access an application online. And that application is going to be at this URL, http 127.0.0.1 5000, okay? And if we just do this, that's going to correspond to this right here, where we don't really have an address beyond just this. So this is a web application. So in order to see what we can do, we're going to open up the browser and we're going to access our web application at 127.0.0.1 5000. Let's go ahead and do that. And as you can see right here, we've got a home page. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of close this right here. Not close it, but make that window smaller. And I'm going to try to put these side by side right here. So right here we've got our views.py, and right here we've got Google Chrome. So if you look right here, for this route, for this URL where there's nothing, we're just getting the message homepage. Okay. Now let's go to this route right here. So let's do this, patients. All right. And see, once we've done that, we've gotten a list of patients. And let's just go to patient. And so let's do just patient without the S. And it looks like it says not found. Why could that be? Patient. Oh, whoops, I forgot my @ symbol right here. See this? That's why it didn't work. Okay, and we've set this to debug. So right here in config, we've set debug equals true. So anytime you make a change, our application is going to be automatically restarted. So let's go ahead and just kind of put this, minimize this, and let's try this again. And that works. So we'll close this and see right here, we've got /patient, and we're getting the message individual patient. So this allows us to determine what information will be displayed when a user goes to /patients or whatever URL we want, whatever URL or route, as we call it, we want to specify, or we have specified. So in reality, what would happen in a web application that's deployed online is, rather than 127.0.1, we would have an actual web address pointing to our application. Or like, for example, you might have www.easyvax.com. And we would set up our server in such a way that that when we access easyvax.com/patient, we would get our message right here. Okay. So that is just this is the most basic web application we could build. It's not that useful for anything, but we're going to take it a step further in this video, and we're going to add an HTML file. So when the user clicks on one of these, or when the user accesses one of these URLs, they're going to see an actual, very basic web page. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to go ahead and minimize this again and kind of come back here. And we're going to kind of close this folder up. Well, actually, we'll have to open it. And inside app, we're going to create a new folder called templates. All right. And inside templates, we're going to create a file called, let's say, homepage.html. All right. So in our templates folder, we've got homepage.html. Now we're going to go back to views right here, and we're going to import a command from Flask. So that command is going to be from Flask, import render template. So when we're using Flask, any HTML file, well, not any HTML file, but HTML files in general are referred to as templates. We'll go into what that means more specifically in our next video. But anyways, that's why we have render template. And now what we're going to do is, instead of returning our home page, or our main page, we're going to do return render template homepage.html. And the way this works is, when we use this function, our Flask program, so our Flask object that's kind of underneath everything, goes directly to a templates folder, or the templates folder we've specified, and looks for homepage.html. So there's a direct connection between this function and our templates folder, and that's where it looks. So now that we've done that, we're going to create a really, really basic HTML document. So we're going to do this. We'll create a little header. And we're going to call this application, well, we can just say Vaccine Passport, for example. Welcome to the Vaccine Passport. All right, just a little message in HTML. And then maybe we can have some sort of text input, type equals text. And label, enter your name. So we've just created a really basic HTML file right here. And now when we go to, well, let's go back to our views file right here. When we go to this route, when we go to this route, so we just go to 127.0.0.1, 5000, we should see our HTML page. And let's see if that happens. Cool, okay. Welcome to the vaccine passport, enter your name. So you can see that, I'm gonna go ahead and close this, not close it, but you can see right here, when we go to this route, we see our HTML page right here with, I'm just going to go ahead with welcome to the vaccine passport and enter your name, followed by a small form element right here. All right. So just to recap, in this tutorial, we have, we've created the basic skeleton for a Flask web application. We've created routes for the web application, and by routes, I mean these things. We've learned how to run a web application through our command line using Python 3 and then run.py. And then we've created a basic HTML file and served it to the user. In our next tutorial, we're going to be looking at how to create more sophisticated HTML files and how to submit data into these routes. So maybe, for example, when the user types in their name, the data for that name would appear in this function, right? These functions, while they don't seem that important at this moment, the way that we manage these routes and we manage data that's sent to these routes, because data will be sent to these routes in future tutorials, is determined by what we write in our functions right here, all right? So these will be highly important, and we'll see why. Anyways, I hope this was an easy and useful way to get an introduction to Flask. Stay tuned for our next tutorials. Have a nice day.